You're probably scrolling through a sea of 45-inch monitors, wondering if any of them actually give you that wow you saw in the demo videos without emptying your wallet for a piece of glass you'll never really use. I get it. The fear of buying a massive screen that looks amazing in the showroom but ends up being a desk-occupying nightmare is real, especially when you're spending a chunk of your gaming budget on a single piece of hardware. And you also want to be sure that the extra curve, the OLED panels, and the 240Hz claim actually translate into something you'll notice day to day, not just a marketing buzzword. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's break down what this LG 45-inch Ultragear actually does in a typical setup, who's likely to love it, and who should probably keep looking. First off, the size and shape are the biggest conversation starters. At 45 inches with a 3440x1440 resolution, the screen stretches wider than a typical 27-inch 1440p monitor, giving you a field of view that feels more like a cockpit than a desk. The 800R curvature is designed to match the natural curvature of the human eye, so the edges stay in focus without you having to swivel your head constantly. In practice, that means when you drop into a flight sim or a racing title, the horizon stays glued to the center of your vision, and you don't get that tunnel feeling you sometimes get with flatter ultra-wide panels. I've seen it work best when the monitor is positioned about an arm's length away, roughly 3,035 inches, which is comfortable for most desktop rigs, but does require a fairly deep desk or a wall mount that can swing the monitor forward. Now, the OLED part is where the magic and the risk lies. OLED panels give you pixel-perfect blacks because each pixel can turn off entirely. In darkroom gaming, that translates into a level of contrast you can't fake with any backlit LED. I've played a few horror titles on this setup, and the shadows were so deep that you could actually see the difference between a faint silhouette and a true black void. That same depth also shines in HDR content, thanks to the VESA DisplayHDR True Black 400 rating. The highlight is that bright parts still pop, but you won't see the haloing you sometimes get on cheaper HDR panels. Speed is another headline. LG claims a 0.03 milliseconds response time and a 240Hz refresh rate, and in real-world testing those numbers hold up. In fast-paced shooters, the motion blur is practically gone, and the frame sync features, NVIDIA G-Sync and the built-in Ultimate Frame Sync, keep tearing at bay even when you push your GPU beyond 200 frames per second. The result is a buttery smooth experience that feels noticeably better than a 144Hz panel, especially when you're competing at a high level where every millisecond counts. But there are trade-offs that aren't always highlighted in the spec sheet. OLED panels, while spectacular for blacks, can suffer from burn-in if you leave static UI elements on screen for long periods. The LG Ultragear does include a pixel shift feature that nudges the image by a few pixels every few minutes, which helps mitigate the risk, but it's still something you need to be aware of if you use the monitor for long work sessions with static toolbars or game HUDs. For most gamers who turn the monitor off after a session, the risk stays low, but power users who keep the screen on for hours at a time should factor that into their decision. Another practical consideration is brightness. OLEDs typically don't hit the same peak nits as high-end LED panels, and this monitor tops out around 400 nits. In a dimly lit room, that's more than enough, but if you plan to use the screen in a bright living room or an office with lots of ambient light, you might find the picture a bit subdued. Pairing it with a dimmer or bias lighting can help preserve the contrast without fighting the panel's native strengths. The connectivity suite is pretty generous for a monitor of this size. You get HDMI 2.1 and DisplayPort, which both support the full 240Hz bandwidth, and there's a USB-C port that delivers up to 65W of power delivery. That means you can plug a laptop directly into the monitor, charge it, and use the screen as an external display, a neat feature if you switch between a gaming rig and a mobile workstation. The downside is that the USB-C port only carries video and power. There are no extra USB-A downstream ports, so you'll need a separate hub if you want to plug in peripherals. So, who should actually consider buying this 45-inch OLED ultra-wide? If you're a serious gamer who plays fast-paced titles, especially shooters, racing sims, or competitive esports, the combination of 240Hz, G-Sync, and the near-instant response time gives you a genuine edge. If you also enjoy immersive single-player experiences where you want the world to wrap around you, think open-world RPGs, flight simulators, or cinematic narratives. The curvature and the ultra-wide aspect ratio will make those experiences feel more enveloping than a standard 27-inch monitor. Creators who need